if you could, you should switch off your Wi-Fi link if you are not using it, because if we are all connected, we are creating a problem of capacity. The second thing is something probably if you have been in this room, you already know that it warms up very easily. So you can make a sign. No, not because of the debate, of course, also because of the debates, but basically for natural reasons. And so you can ask, and then we'll open the window. And the third one maybe is related to the second one, which is that at least you have some water there for you. So if you need some water, there you have it. Okay, so this is the panel. The first and last panel of the second week, the second day, which is Internet self-regulation. How does it work? I'll make a very few opening remarks. The first one, I'm obliged to say that when we talk about self-regulation, maybe we are referring to a constellation of notions, because the notion itself of self-regulation is not clear. There are many definitions and many different notions of self-regulation. Sometimes we talk about self-regulation when we talk about, let's say, norms that have been adopted by an industry or a professional sector. In other cases, self-regulation refers to the norms that have been adopted by, for example, a single powerful company that has its own self-regulatory system, self-regulatory scheme. Think, for example, of YouTube or Twitter, for example. Well, we could also include in the idea, in the notion of self-regulation, this so-called self-help restrictions that can be articulated and applied by users themselves. And finally, we could even think of the possibility of a self-regulatory scheme that is, in a way, state-supported. But it is still a self-regulatory scheme, which is something that is slightly different, probably, from a core regulatory scheme. So you see that this is a very tricky, just to start with the notion, it's a very tricky notion. When we talk about self-regulatory schemes, probably the main challenges for the adoption and the success of a self-regulatory scheme, first of all, we have to be able to identify, to properly identify, or to be aware of the difference between real self-regulatory schemes and interested self-defend private regulatory schemes, in which the idea of public interest is not present at all. I think that this distinction is relevant. Another important thing is which are the incentives for the adoption of a self-regulatory scheme. In other words, if we have very interesting, well-done, well-articulated self-regulatory schemes, but there are no incentives for the majority of a certain industry or a certain sector to join it, maybe it will not succeed. And finally, last but not least, a very important element, which is how we safeguard, how we guarantee the independence and accountability of self-regulatory schemes. And, well, related to that, how we articulate in a proper way the cost of, because self-regulatory schemes normally have a cost for those who have adopted them, and this may be a disincentive for the adoption. In the online world, there are many reasons, I think, that have fostered the adoption of self-regulatory schemes. For example, the existence of very powerful intermediaries that probably have more power than the states in order to regulate the flow of information and communications through the networks. Then the fact that these powerful intermediaries enjoy very important liability exemptions. So statutory, it's quite hard to apply to them typical statutory regulations, in particular in terms of content regulation. well, the fact that the notion, for example, of a professional journalist is really broad, or has broadened in the field of the online world. So the old, typical professional ethic codes probably are not enough to cover these new activities. And of course, we should ask ourselves whether pre-existing, pre-online self-regulatory schemes can be applied to the same activities that now take place in the online world. So, well, these, I think, are some of the important things that maybe we have to deal with this morning. And I have some questions just to throw, because I think that some of them will be tackled by our speakers. For example, what are the benefits and disadvantages of self-regulation of the online industry? Are web portals or search engines subject to any kind of regulation? Who should follow journalism ethical standards in the digital age? What is the impact of the internet on media self-regulation mechanism? Have journalism codes of ethics have been adapted to the new online environment? Are media more accountable thanks to the internet? And, well, three last and I think important questions. Why should we self-regulate the internet? How and which parts of the internet should be self-regulated? And the final and most difficult part is, should we regulate or self-regulate the self-regulation of the internet? Which is, I think that it's a relevant, quis custodet custodes. In Latin, is much better. Should we regulate in a way or self-regulate the self-regulation of the internet? How we do that? Okay, so this is the easy part because I'm just raising the questions. And to answer to them, we have several relevant speakers here. To start with Adeline Hulin, who is the project coordinator for the Office of the OSCE Representative on Freedom of the Media since 2006. I'll be just... I'll read the first line because you all have the bios. So Adeline, who will be starting. Then we have Joe McNamee, who is the director of European Digital Rights, which is an association of digital civil rights association from 20 European countries. Then we'll have Liliana Zurovac, who is the executive director of the Press Council in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And we don't have Susan Fengler, but we have the pleasure to have Mr. Klaus Wiesler, who is researcher at Medienhaus in Vienna, and he teaches at the University of Vienna. And last but not least, we have the virtual and spiritual presence that will become physical in a while of Aidan White, whose plane is about to land, or maybe it has already landed. He's the director of the Ethical Journalism Network, which is a global campaign launched in 2012 to promote ethics and good governance across all media platforms. I'm sure that he will be, well, we hope that he will be here very soon. So I think that we can, this being said, we can start with Adeline, who will present, I think, this guidebook that has been elaborated by the OSCE, and probably he will set the basic framework of our discussion. So thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It's my pleasure to introduce you this morning to our new OSCE publication, the Online Media Self-Regulation Guidebook. You have some copies here, but otherwise it was on the second floor available. So I'd like to make a short introduction about that book. And first of all, I'd like just to say that I'm really pleased to present this book today, that even more pleased that I'm surrounded by some of its authors. And I'd like to start by thanking them once again for their valuable contributions. And then saying that, starting by the fact that self-regulation is not a new topic for our office. we actually have long been promoting the idea of media self-regulation as the most free speech friendly way of regulating the media already for a while, and for many reasons. But first and foremost, because we believe that it's a way to ensure that media professionals abide by their professional standards while minimizing state interference in the field of media. And we also believe that media professionals should actually define their ethical standards themselves. So a few years ago, we have published a guidebook. It was the Media Self-Regulation Guidebook, and you can find it online on our website, which was already made of questions and answers on the topic, and it was actually a success. And in the meantime, we realized that a lot of new questions arose from the new media landscape regarding the internet, and to what extent is the model of self-regulation a model that can adapt to the internet? And also, is it possible to talk of internet self-regulation as we talk of media self-regulation? So for this reason, we started working on this new project, and we came up with this guidebook, which is also made of questions and answers with a lot of concrete examples. And it's made in 4 chapters. The first one being the new media landscape, the second one being about something which is a bit slightly different from media self-regulation, but it's about the online industry self-regulation. Then we have a chapter on the new ethical standards, and last and not least, a chapter about media self-regulation adapting to the internet era. And I will just come back on this point very quickly. So we thought that apart from the new media landscape, that one chapter that deserved specific discussion was the online industry self-regulation. And this was actually a chapter which was done by Joey McNamee here. And because there was a multiplication of initiatives to push for online industry self-regulation, for instance, to address illegal content or copyright issues. And so we thought that it would be good to examine the disadvantages and advantages of such a model. And actually, there was yesterday a lot of discussion already in different rooms about that. I just would like to refer to one tweet on our OSCE webpage about, it was from Sanya Kelish, saying that she cautions against self-regulation because its decision cannot always be challenged in courts. I mean, this is like some points that deserve to be discussed when we talk about online self-regulation, online industry self-regulation. But now coming to media self-regulation, there was also a lot of new questions about, because it's a model that was created for the print media. And now that actually all newspapers have a web page, or that there are actually a lot of pure players, like pure online media, are flourishing, how actually we had a lot of questions on how press council or ombudsmen are actually adapting to this new environment. And there were many questions, for instance, are press council accepting complaints about user online comments placed on the newspaper web page? Or are press council now accepting bloggers, pure online media, web portal under their membership? So how are they actually, how is it now working, all this press council? And actually, I think it's going to be interesting to hear about the experience of Liliana and the Press Council of Bosnia-Herzegovina, how they're working on these specific issues. And generally, how one chapter is about how the ethical standards have changed. Because if we think about it, the culture of traditional journalism was relying before on values such as balance or impartiality. And today, it's really changing, and we see that the culture of online journalism is sometimes quite different, and it's often based on values such as immediacy, transparency, and sometimes partiality. So, to what extent the ethical standards adopted the last century often, can now be applied in the new information landscape. And we hope to have Aiden White to actually talk a bit more about that today. So you will find in this guidebook as many answers as questions being asked, and it's our hope that you will find it useful. And I'm, of course, very happy to provide you with more copies or more information if you wish so. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. You have some copies here, but it's also available online, so don't fight at the end of the session to have a copy. So everyone can have his own copy. Well, my shyness has made me forget to introduce myself. I'm not substituting a person called Joan. It actually is a male name in my region of the world. It's the Catalan version. Yesterday we were talking about minorities. It's the Catalan version of Juan. Huh? So I used to be at the regulatory authority of. I used to be the Secretary General of the Catalonia Audiovisual Council, but now I teach communications law at the university in Barcelona. So now we have Joe McNamee, please.
Thank you very much, and it's great to see so many people because this is a very important topic. In December of last year, the European Parliament passed a resolution which seemed to include a statement which seemed to be just a statement of fact, namely that there's a global consensus reflected in international law that restrictions on fundamental rights must be foreseen by law. The fact is clear. All of the major international legal instruments, like the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the European Charter on Fundamental Rights, all say that restrictions must be based on law. However, it's also clear that this global consensus is currently falling apart without any debate and without a strategy and without a vision. Because for freedom of communication to function, we rely increasingly on internet companies, and these internet companies are increasingly being asked by governments to self-regulate. And when governments say self-regulate, they mean regulate other people. It's self-regulation without the self. So what does this look like in practice? Well, a few months ago, there was an upload filtering trial started in the Netherlands, and it was set up on the initiative of the Dutch police. Now, the thing about upload filtering, by default, is that clearly it's a restriction on freedom of communication. And the European Court of Human Rights explained in the Scarlett Sabam case that such restrictions must be based on law and are a breach of fundamental rights. The Sabam Netlog case said exactly the same thing. So how exactly did it happen that the Netherlands introduced a pilot project which restricted fundamental rights, according to the European Court of Justice? And the answer is in the project report, which was obtained by one of EDRI's members, Bits of Freedom. And the project report explained that the government is not allowed to limit the use of the internet. Therefore, for stopping uploads, cooperation between the police and private parties is necessary. So, as far as the police were concerned, if the government or the police can encourage a private company to implement restrictions, then they are not subjects of international law, and therefore democratic processes can be avoided. And coincidentally or otherwise, we see a stream of measures that are acting to undermine this norm of international law that restrictions must be law-based. Within the past 2 years, we have seen both ACTA and the OECD communique on internet intermediaries promote voluntary enforcement measures by internet companies. Both ACTA and the OECD communique refer to a concept of fair process. A fair process is an interesting thing because it sounds like fair trial and it sounds like due process. But it's neither one nor the other. In fact, it's neither. So we have two international instruments actively replacing the concept of due process and fair trial with a new definition which doesn't actually mean anything. And this approach has been strongly supported by the European Commission. And not alone did the European Commission support ACTA, but it also finances a wide range of privatized enforcement measures. But it's difficult to understand why. So ACTA's Article 27 would have placed an obligation on European member states to encourage privatized enforcement of intellectual property law by the business community. The question is, what would Europe gain from this? If you look at SOPA, the US controversial proposal, SOPA proposed giving unlimited immunity to all internet access providers, hosting providers, domain name registries, domain name registrars, search engines, and payment providers, giving them freedom from liability for punitive actions that these American companies would take against foreign providers. Now, from a US perspective, it's great. First of all, this circumvents the US Constitution because it would be the private companies undertaking the restrictions. Secondly, Google and Visa and MasterCard and PayPal and VeriSign and all of these companies are American. So they get the opportunity to export US law into other jurisdictions. So it solves a domestic problem and it solves a foreign problem. But why would Europe think that it would be a good idea for US companies outside the rule of law to regulate our free speech? I've asked repeatedly and I've never got an answer. You'll be possibly not surprised to hear. But should we really be scared? Is it really that bad? And the answer can be found by looking at WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks hasn't actually been accused of breaking any law, but through the press, the US Vice President did accuse WikiLeaks of being terrorists. And as a US company, you don't want to be seen to be providing services to terrorists, obviously. So Visa, PayPal, MasterCard withdrew their services to WikiLeaks. Amazon withdrew its hosting services to WikiLeaks. The company that had registered wikileaks.org for them decided it didn't want to renew the domain name. And so a whole series of intermediaries outside the rule of law, without even an accusation of a breach of the law, managed to silence the website. So as this trend continues, any online service needs to worry about the law and the jurisdiction of the company that registered their domain name, of the registry of the domain name, of the hosting service that they're using, etc., etc., etc. So you have to pre-censor. You will increasingly have to pre-censor yourself based on the interpretation of a series of companies of the law and the politics in the country that they happen to be based. Now, one of the things that the EU-funded Clean IT project suggested was that it should be possible, internet companies should make their terms of service as vague as possible in order to allow flexibility, in order to allow them to impose sanctions if they see fit. So if we take Microsoft as an example, Microsoft is not the worst. Microsoft is a member of the Global Network Initiative. To a certain extent, they're heading towards being the best. So what does Microsoft's terms of service look like? So their online terms of service say that Microsoft reserves the right at all times to disclose any information as Microsoft deems necessary to satisfy any applicable law, regulation, legal process, or government request, or to edit, refuse, to post, or to remove any information or materials in whole or in part in Microsoft's sole discretion. So we used to have laws, we used to have courts, and now we have open-ended terms of service. And it gets worse, because terms of use are frequently bad, and occasionally they veer into comedy, and they even veer into quantum theory. The App Developer Agreement of Microsoft includes a provision that Microsoft may remove or suspend the availability of any app from the Windows Store for any reason, or for no reason. So, it's not just in quantum physics where things happen for no reason. It's quantum physics and internet self-regulation. Similar wording also appears in other Microsoft terms of service. And then we look at leadership, global leadership on freedom of expression, on right to privacy. There was a report recently from the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. This United Nations body called for, and I quote, informal relationships or understandings with ISPs, both domestic and foreign, that might hold data relevant for law enforcement purposes about procedures for making such data available for law enforcement investigations. So the United Nations body was calling for arbitrary restrictions on privacy and freedom of communication outside the rule of law. Now, this would be bad enough on its own, but what makes it completely bizarre is that the United Nations' own International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights outlaws arbitrary or unlawful interference with privacy, family, home, or correspondence. We have found ourselves in this world of self-regulation in a situation where the United Nations is calling on member states to break international law developed by the United Nations. But the good thing is that the law should only be broken to uphold the law. And there we have it. Somehow or other, we've managed to get from a situation where international law was clear that restrictions must be based on law, through a stream of different initiatives which have never been subject to democratic scrutiny, which have never been analysed for anti-competitive effects, for legality. At what stage does a state incur state responsibility under international law for an interference when they're asking a company to do something? And I hope, with this good turnout today, I hope that maybe we can finally start the debate that has never happened yet. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I think that this idea that self-regulation is regulation without the self, I think it's a very important thing to keep in mind. And I think that it's important to outline that sometimes we used to look at the good side of self-regulation as something opposite to statutory regulation, which is supposed to be bad. But then on the other side, maybe it's good to outline that traditional regulation is based in certain constitutional guarantees and procedures that, in fact, they were mentioned by Don yesterday, and now that the risk of privatization of law enforcement connected to this idea of prey censoring, or let's say a chilling effect, are very remarkable element. Okay, so thank you very much. Now we have Liliana. So thank you very much.
I'm a practitioner of the self-regulation, actually. I'm running this self-regulatory body for print and online media in Bosnia and Herzegovina for 7 years. But actually, the Press Council in Bosnia and Herzegovina is established in 2000, existing for 13 years. And it is a big success, actually, that we survived for 13 years. And I do hope that it will be next 13 and 13 years. I like that number, actually. Finding it very happy, cheerful, and stimulating, because 13 is numerological number 1 and 3, meaning 4, meaning success. Success for self-regulatory bodies in our region is very important, actually, because it is something very new for developing of media freedom and developing new approach for free media informing. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, apart the all problems we have on political levels and economical levels, actually, we do not have problem with freedom of speech, freedom of informing, and freedom of access to any kind of source of information, including internet. There is no restrictions for social media or for access to internet, and it is very important. I think that all of us have to fight to keep that very fortunate circumstances in our country. The Press Council in Bosnia and Herzegovina is established by mostly in effort of international organizations, and it was accepted by 6 associations of journalists in 2000, and my dear colleague Helena Mandic yesterday, talking about hate speech, was explaining also about that process, how the Communication Regulatory Agency is established, as well the same things for the Press Council. But Press Council was re-established in 2006, gathering all main print media editors, print media owners in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and they accepted rules and regulations of the self-regulation. And also we updated the press code, existing press code at that time. It was a self-regulatory body for the print media. But in 2010, by such kind of soft pressure from public, from citizens, we started thinking about how to implement, is it possible to implement the self-regulatory principles to the online media. That soft pressure came actually from citizens who sent complaints or requests. Can you do something with web portals? Can you do something with anonymous comments in user-generated contents of web portals? What is going on? Is there a regulatory agency who will be in charge? Are you, as the Press Council, or prosecutors' offices, or what? But at the same time, somehow, it was definitely time to do something with web portals. In whole Europe, in the press councils of European countries, the same discussion starting. And since we are a member of Alliance of Independent Press Councils of Europe, AIPCE, at the annual assembly in Moscow in 2011, we were discussing very seriously about how to deal with the web portals. Are the web portals in charge for providing professional information as well as print media or electronic media? What to do with the forums, what to do with comments, finally. And we accepted the same rules, let's say rules, that our press code, existing press codes, has to be improved in press code for print and online media, meaning that the professional rules, who are the same for any kind of media, has to be applied in reporting in web portals. It doesn't mean that forums or other kind of blogs or other kind of expressions in internet are under that rules. Only web portals who are going to be or are intending to be professional media who provides information for people as other media. So we adopted that rule, and nothing's changed in the press codes except the additional name print and online media. But the comments of anonymous visitors with nicknames, are also a part of the web portals. And that was the dilemma, what to do with that. We couldn't say that all professional rules for given to journalists have to be applied also to broad citizens, because they have a right to free express their opinion, criticism, or any kind of freedom of expression to put under or the text. And we say, okay, in our countries, particularly talking about Bosnia and Herzegovina, the web portal rooms or media have no money to employ a bunch of people who will be in charge for to pre-moderate for 24 hours the comments. It is impossible for them to organize that. So they do that kind of post-moderation of comments. And we adopted a rule that editor-in-chief is not responsible for comment at the moment that comment is posted below the text. But if in this comment is recognized hate speech, incitements to discrimination, to physical attack, even intimidation or defamation, editor is obliged to remove that comment. If he rejects to do that, he becomes responsible for that particular content as well as for journalists' content. And that is in function. Actually, when we jumped in that very uncertain field of online media, internet, we did expect everything, actually. But we were very nicely surprised that online media editors accepted principles of self-regulation gladly. Most of them, of course, not all of them, but most of them. I'm talking about most of them. Because most of them want to develop their web portals as very professional media, as very professional source of information, gathering people around their web portal. Some of them are really very good, very professional, and even classical media, so-called classical media, print or electronic media, use their own information as a source of information, saying, I picked up that information from that and that web portal. But regarding the complaints, we accept complaints of citizens on reporting of all web portals, no matter if they are our members or not. The same rule is for the print media. And they accept decisions of the Complaints Commission of the Press Council. Complaints Commission in the frame of the Press Council is an independent body who analyze complaints of citizens on the media reporting, trying to find the best solution and trying to find if there are mistakes, professional mistakes or not. On this way, They protect citizens from manipulative, inaccurate media reporting, but at the same time, they protect journalists, protecting freedom of good professional media reporting. And decisions of the Complaints Commission, web portals always announced and published in their space, because they're not limited with space as the print media are, and very often they published original and full decision of the Complaints Commission. But what we discovered as a problem with the web portals, many people who came to post comments on the web portals are not educated, and they are not aware that freedom of expression and freedom of internet means also some kind of responsibility, that mistakes and crime of internet is under law, prosecution. And many of them said, okay, I can write whatever I want. Who can do anything? That's freedom. That's freedom of expression. You cannot forbid me to write something what is wrong as a hate speech. Hate speech is criminal act. And we developed some very particular educational programs to educate people what is freedom of expression actually, and where the freedom of expression ends and where the crime begins. And to do that, we include also other institutions and other levels of institutions who can help us. These are police agencies and the prosecutors' offices. Since for years we have regular educational seminars about freedom of expression, Article 10 of European Convention on Human Rights, with the judges, prosecutors. We included in that kind of educational program of the Press Council also a program You Are Not Invisible, trying to spread as many information as possible to people, to citizens, about their right to express their opinion, but also to give them all information about criminal law and law against discrimination, what we have in our country. So the action You Are Not Invisible is very successful, actually, in the aim to educate people, to aware them about what is wrong. Last year, in 2012, we have a huge expansion of hate speech, especially in the web portals and in comments. And some of them finished with physical attacks to some people, and there are very bad things about this. And because of that, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, who is a nationally very divided country, it is very important to have such kind of educational programs. Educational programs, not restriction, not punishment, not to send people to jail or something like that, but to educate them how to preserve freedom of expression in internet and how to be a part of self-regulatory system in the web portal. Self-regulation is a very good system for protection of freedom of media and freedom of informing, and the positive part of the self-regulation of media is that it includes very actively all citizens in raising professional standards of informing. And because of that, I think that we will develop that self-regulation to the web portal, because any kind of regulation or restrictions from government will end on negative way.
Thank you very much. I think the experience and the coming from the Bosnia and Herzegovina has been very, very interesting. Of course, the issue of press councils is connected to, well, you know, you all know the question of the Leveson inquiry, where there are, maybe it's I don't know if it's a typical British problem or some of the things or some of the debates that appear in the Leveson inquiry can be extended to the rest of Europe. But if you want, we can discuss about that. I think it's interesting that you mention that you have used the notion of web portals, not online newspapers, for example, but you mentioned web portals, which is a very broad notion, and you know that, for example, that in the context of the European Union and the directive, we make a distinction between, from a regulatory point of view, between online newspapers and those web pages that are used to provide audiovisual services. So here you have put the whole online web services under the umbrella of the self-regulatory scheme, so it's something that it's interesting. And finally, well, just to remind you that on the issue of commons and liability, we already had a panel yesterday. But anyway, it's an important thing. It has to do with self-regulation as well, because I mean, as we all know, on one hand, great damages can be caused by content, I mean contents that are, comments that are not really controlled, but on the other hand, the imposition of an obligation to monitor the content by newspapers, maybe it's a disproportionate and not realistic measure to be adopted. So, but these are many things that we can discuss. Now we have, now it's your turn, Klaus. Thank you.
Hello. My name is Klaus Bicher, and I'm working at Medienhaus Wien, and therefore I'm working at an EU-funded research project on media accountability and transparency in Europe. It's called MediaAct. We are doing the Austrian part and also a lot of dissemination and policy recommendations for the Commission. Our research project was going over 3.5 years, and we are now in the finishing phase. In the first phase, we had a look at the status quo of and potentials of media accountability systems in Europe. We had 12 EU states in our research consortium and 2 Arab states as well, to have a look how these things are changing there. The second big part was a survey we did. It was an online survey among over 1,700 journalists in Europe and also in the 2 participating Arab states. The national samples were at least 100 journalists selected along 2 patterns, one depending on the type of media and the other one on the position, so we can also have a look at the different notions of journalists in being editor-in-chief or being a freelancer. And I will now give you some insights into what journalists think of the impact of the internet to self-regulation. Because one aspect that is often missed is the inclusion of all stakeholders to media self-regulation, including also the public. And the internet increased the possibilities the public and the audience have to media self-regulation and to keeping the media accountable. We asked the journalists if they think that the internet had increased the people's readiness to call the news media to account, and nearly in all countries, journalists really believe that the internet increased the people's readiness to call the news media to account, especially in those countries where media accountability institutionalized via press councils or where media freedom is a big issue. The Arab states as well as also in France, where we have no press council, journalists really believe that the internet changed here a lot. We had another look on the various ways where journalists get criticized by, and one thing is, of course, journalists get mostly criticized by their colleagues, but on the second place, we can find commenting online. So also the journalists not also believe that the internet changed the readiness, they also really experience it on their own, that with the diverse possibilities of social media, of commenting in forums, etc., they have to they get called to account by their audience. The audience is reacting to what they are writing, what they are broadcasting, etc. If we have a look at, we can also see this when we had a look at the instruments of media accountability and self-regulation. Of course, press councils have a lot of impact in the eyes of journalists, especially in those countries where we have good working press councils, like in Finland, Germany, or Switzerland. But we have but a lot of journalists really believe that journalists' blogs, that criticism on social media, and that user comments have quite a big influence on journalism. So I think we really see a change here, and we can see that the online tools bring new aspects to media self-regulation. If we have a look at the different ages of the journalists, right, we can see that younger journalists believe into these changes more than the older ones, which is, of course, I think in the next years we will experience this shift. I had a look at some examples. We can later on talk a little bit more about them. For example, if we have a look at the Austrian Press Council, it was established in the end of 2010. They're really trying hard to be present on the internet, but they have 800, 500 followers and 130 Facebook friends, which is, yeah, I think that's a number that can be increased. If we have a look at the best known Austrian Media Watch blog, this watch blog has over 10,000 Facebook friends. 10,000 Facebook friends also interacting, criticizing the media, giving hints what was wrong in the newspaper, where we had ethical breaches, etc. So we can see that the audience really responds to that and is reflecting online, on offline media, on boulevard newspapers. If you go out to the Viennese tube stations, you can find these lovely boulevard free newspapers, and you can imagine what you can find online in these discussion platforms. Other examples, we had in France, for example, a blog which is dedicated to media education, where you have interested people discussing about media issues. We have the same thing in Poland, and we have, for example, in Italy, where we have an interesting media situation, and we have comedy and soft news reflecting the media. So we also have new tools and new kind of forms to present media criticism and acting as a watchdog and criticizing the media via other tools. So I won't bring up some more data because I think it's confusing. So yeah, that's it.
It's not confusing at all. Thank you very much for sharing with us the outcome of your research. I think that it has brought some elements that will be useful for our discussion. For the moment, Aidan is still virtually here, but not physically here. So, well, if he comes before the end, we'll give him the chance to give his speech. So now I think it's time for questions. Before that, do you have, I mean, between the different members of the here, you have any question or you want to interact? No? We go? Okay. So please identify yourself and use the mic, because otherwise we will lose your comments forever.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Aslamidin Atoif. I'm from Tajikistan, Association of Internet Service Providers. So I wonder if we discuss here self-regulation of online content or self-regulation of internet. Because if we discuss self-regulation of internet, this auditorium is not enough. We are not, I mean, we don't have enough capacity to do that, to discuss that. But if we talk about self-regulation of online content or mass media content, then I think we are capable to do that. So we're talking about content regulation or internet regulation.
Okay, thank you. It's very clear. We have a second question there, and then.
Thank you very much. My name is Wolfgang Benedek, University of Graz here in Austria. I found all the presentations very interesting, but taking into account that we have a parallel panel on multi-stakeholder approach, I'm wondering why we don't have a more multi-stakeholder approach on the panel, meaning there's no industry who could give also their point of view on our discussions. But anyway, I think that we have seen here a broad range of relevance of self-regulation, very critical from Joe and very positive, if I may say so, from Liliana. And this shows, I think, that it really depends on the context, whether there are watchdogs which make sure that this self-regulation is a meaningful one. And I also think what Joe mentioned, the regulation of self-regulation, is crucial because the regulator has to give a framework for self-regulation. Otherwise, the states would make themselves abundant, would make themselves dispensable. They would not be needed anymore. And this is also the expectation of the users, of the consumers, if I may say so. And we have several cases at this moment challenging, for example, the terms of service of certain providers, exactly for that reason that they're not specific enough, that they're not user-friendly enough, that they violate national consumer protection laws and so on. So here a proper regulation could prevent such cases to come up because they would force a certain level of self-regulation. There are certainly certain critical issues when it comes to the online industry. For example, the do not track issue. Yeah? The advertisement industry is absolutely against it, and many organizations are fighting for it, and I think rightly so. So this is an issue on what level will the regulation finally take place. Part of the industry is already cooperating on that level, others are not because of their business model. And here we cannot expect that the industry will act against its own business model. So we need the regulation. We need the framework, so to say, for the self-regulation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other comment? Yes, please, Helena.
Hi, I'm Helena Mandic from the Communications Regulatory Agency of Bosnia and Herzegovina. I just wanted to just briefly clarify. I think that there was a confusion. Audiovisual media services are under our jurisdiction regardless of the platform through which they are delivered. So maybe, I mean, it's good what you pointed out. Maybe we can discuss maybe to change the wording in our codes just to, but that's another issue. But I wanted to ask Adeline, yeah, you mentioned something about court protection in cases of self-regulation. And I think it's a very interesting question. I mean, when somebody removes your comment, how can you know, who decides on why the comment was removed, and how can you actually challenge their decisions? I mean, I think it's really interesting question. Maybe you could elaborate.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so now we have. Basically, two questions and one remark that we can comment on. So it's up to you, Joe. You can, yeah.
I think Wolfgang's question addresses something very important consumer. The problem is that we also use the term self-regulation to describe activities that are not regulation of self. And you can't self-regulate somebody else in the same way as you can't volunteer somebody else. And if we keep on talking about privatized enforcement mechanisms as if it was self-regulation, then we're never going to get anywhere, because we're calling something an apple when it's an orange. The other big distinction that needs to be taken into account is what problem is being solved. Because if industry is trying to solve a specific problem in its own self-interest, it will act in a particular way, which will normally be productive, because businesses are there to do business. The problem is privatized enforcement projects are often introduced not to solve the problem in question, but to keep the damn government away from the door. And then the problem being solved isn't the problem being solved. The problem being solved is a different problem. And that's where we have the issue with do not track, in my view. Do not track is if we can paste something together, if we can pretend everything's okay, if we can say we had a multi-stakeholder approach and we solved something, then the governments will leave us alone. And so the internal-external problem, we need a far better understanding of what we're talking about. Because if we keep on talking about apples and pears and things that are unrelated and pretending they're the same, we're never going to get anywhere. And that's what struck me, if I may say, with your presentation. It started internal, it became external, and it was all being described as the same thing. And the internal activity that you started talking about was entirely sensible and reasonable and understandable because it was industry, the journalists regulating themselves, and then finished in the same project with a completely different shape, working out how the online services can regulate the people that are using it. And because it's not the same thing, I'm not sure it should be treated the same way. That's not saying that it's necessarily bad what you're doing, but the methodology should be different.
No, I will just add that self-regulation has to be voluntarily accepted by media, by editors, by owners of media. You cannot implement that, as you said, to someone else. Self-regulation means we accepted our rules and regulations, what we made in our framework of act and professional standards, and that's self-regulation. If we don't regulate ourselves, someone else will do that, meaning in most of the cases the government will do that. And if government will regulate our media freedom, media free expression and informing, there will not be freedom, actually. Because of that, self-regulation has to be voluntarily accepted, to be voluntarily implemented. We cannot, as the Press Council, to force media to publish reactions, denials, or apology to someone if that person is damaged by media reporting. The editor has voluntarily to decide to do that, or to decide to publish decision of the Complaints Commission that they breach code of practice.
Yes, that was the aspect of it that I said was regulating self and makes complete sense. The question is, when you invite people to take part in an online discussion at the bottom of an article, and that you have rules which are based on something other than the law, where you say, well, we don't accept hate speech. Okay, well, is that your definition of hate speech? Is it the legal definition of hate speech? Is it the case that I need to try to censor myself in order to guess what you might subsequently censor based on your interpretation of the law? And then
that's a good question. Thank you. It is legally defined hate speech, discriminatory speech. From in all, we have several criminal law and also in law against discrimination. It is very precisely written what means hate speech against some groups or some people. Oh, our Mr. Aidan Wright is here. Yes. Welcome.
We warmly welcome Aidan. So please take a seat. That we are happy that you finally landed.
Fog in Vienna. What a surprise.
So before we take more questions, I think that we are now ready to listen to you, if you are ready to talk.
I don't know if you'll really like what I've got to say. But anyway, look, first of all, I apologize for the fact that I've been trapped once again by international airlines and so on, and I'm very, very delayed. And so I apologize that I've missed the wonderful presentations that have been made and the provocative questions that have been posed. I understand very much the sort of debate that you've been having. And I suppose what I want to say just briefly, if I can, for just a couple of minutes, is to reinforce something which I think is incredibly important when we're talking about regulation and self-regulation in particular. It seems to me that with the transformation of the media landscape, we have to re-examine completely how we see journalism, how we see the operation of media, and so on and so forth. And of course we have to re-examine also the values that we've traditionally held so important, such as self-regulation, the notion of self-regulation. How do we see it? Since I left the International Federation of Journalists, I've been focused absolutely not on questions related to technology or the future of media or new markets or indeed even the internet and the wonderful new services that are provided. I've been absolutely consumed with concern about content and about quality of content, about journalism, about how journalism is to be developed. And I believe very, very strongly that if we are going to rethink or look again at how we see journalism in the future, we have to look beyond what has been a sort of traditional idea about how we police journalism, which is based upon two basic ideas. First of all, is that the journalists themselves, the individuals, have to be competent, have to be aware, have to be driven by values, and have to perform ethically. And I think that's important. No question at all. We need confident, informed, intelligent people to work as journalists. And the other idea has been that what we also need is we need self-regulation, national structures to be able to sort of police and to monitor a journalism and to make media accountable. What I've often found is that what is missing in that process is to focus on the question of ownership, on the question of the proprietors, on the question of the media institutions themselves. And actually, very often when we're talking about how we deal with self-regulation and so on, we tend to sort of steer away from confronting the most difficult problem at all that faces us. And that is, how do we engage media organizations, many of them facing enormous problems economically, politically, structurally? How do we confront them at a time when they're reducing investment in journalism and the quality of journalism, spending less on investigative journalism, less on research, less on training? How do we engage with them to get them to take their primary responsibility, which is to provide a moral leadership in the areas where journalism is practiced, so that there can be the notion of a credible national self-regulator and journalists who are confident enough as individuals to be able to do their work well. And I think, therefore, the question of internal self-regulation, the responsibility of creating rules for good governance inside media, transparency in ownership of media, making media themselves accountable by creating what I would call confidence-building measures which will encourage them to be transparent and open, and also to confront the reality of conflicts of interest. The conflicts of interest which exist in the media organizations regarding, for instance, the unhealthy relationships between media owners and very often political groups, or the unhealthy relationship between media and corporate interests. And we've seen this most vividly, and I'm sure it's been discussed here in Great Britain when the News International case, where we saw a massive problem which revealed one thing that I believe absolutely fervently, is that when we're talking about media and journalism and standards and quality, it's like a pyramid. It's not enough to focus on the delivery at the bottom of the pyramid of good quality. You have to have standards and values at the top of the media pyramid. And the News International case is absolutely proof positive that if you have corruption at the top of the media, it is impossible to deliver the quality of journalism that's required by a democracy at the bottom of the media pyramid. So that the culture internally is what we have to address here. And it's no use saying that at News International, well, that was different because it was criminality. What was going on was criminal malpractice. That criminal malpractice only arose because of the atmosphere and culture of collusion with power that had already been created within the organization. When Rupert Murdoch was able, through his personal contacts, to decide which political party in Britain he would anoint to be potentially the next governing party in Britain, this was enormous power. And that power corrupted the process of ownership. And that's why it's very, very clear, and we ought to thank Rupert Murdoch for this, because his actions at News International have opened up a very important area of debate which has been closed for so long. We need to focus on how we improve the question of internal governance, good rules, and good practice inside media houses. If we begin to do that, we will achieve the two things that we really want to have. One is a national self-regulator, such as you have in Bosnia, which is credible and which is respected, because the media organizations are participating in it. And secondly, you have journalists able to work according to standards and able to believe that when they make decisions about who they talk to, how they work, and what they do, they will be supported by a management that believes in their values. So this question of the management is not just one of the players. In my view, it's the critical element that needs to be added into any program that's going to create a credible system of self-regulation. That's how I see it now, and certainly that's how I see it in the future when we have this completely transformed media landscape. That's all I wanted to say. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Indeed, I think that your presentation really fits in what we have been discussing. So oxygen is a scarce resource here, but please breathe. You can take part of it. So we have now two quick questions, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So Tom was first. Yes. This man here.
I am Tom Moring. I am working at the University of Helsinki, and I've been working in some newspaper companies and in the radio, and I come from Finland. And in Finland, as in other Nordic countries, we have a self-regulatory system which is very close to that which Mr. Aidan White just described. There is a problem arising from the practice of these self-regulatory bodies for the press, and that is they were based basically exactly to avoid state regulation of the media, which is, of course, as I see it from the point of view of journalism, a sound thing to do. But then the courts come in and use self-regulatory tools in court procedures as arguments, which is something that the journalists and the media owners are strictly against. would you have a comment on this kind of practice and how you cope with it?
Gather four questions. There we have Divina, and then you, and
thank you. I'm Divina Fraumex. I'm professor at the Sorbonne, and I've been working on issues of regulation, self-regulation, and I arrived a bit late, Joe, so I'm not sure if you mentioned that in your talk, but I wonder if the word co-regulation has been introduced in the conversation or not. Because it seems to me that what you were describing, the confusion between internal and external, could gain in clarification if it was agreed that self-regulation is internal, and then when another stakeholder, be it the state, be it civil society, be it, I don't know, providers, the industry, comes in and brings a slightly different perspective, but it's negotiated somehow between these different stakeholders. And I think it would be helpful maybe to consider co-regulation as a different tool that would do what bothers me about self-regulation, which is that the same organ is judge and party, and therefore is not sure that they integrate other perspectives. So that's what I just wanted as a point of clarification. Thank you.
Thank you. A question here, and then three. We have three last questions. 1, 2, and Peter.
Hi, I'm Samra Lučkin. I'm from Borom Agency, Sarajevo, Bosnia. I actually have a question for all panelists, and there is one component I'm missing here in all these discussions. Self-regulation is not about journalists, media, and editors only. It's about public. It's about protection of public from irresponsible journalism. So I'm missing this public component and the public approach from that side in all these kind of discussions. And furthermore, what we are going to do in terms of self-regulation now when the public become a part of that communication process. You mentioned web portals, comments, so public is not only from on the other side, public is also the part of this communication process, not only journalists. So how the self-regulation mechanism can be applied overall, not only on the part of editor journals, and not only that they are going to be held responsible, how we are going to held responsible those who are participated equally in the communication process.
Okay, thank you. There was a gentleman next to there. No? So then Peter.
Peter Moller, Central European University. So, the quality of the press that Aidan described seems to be a cultural issue. So it seems to me that we can wish a wonderful press, but that doesn't justify regulation. What justified, I'm not debating anyone, but I'm just raising this as a comment and as a question. So what seemed to justify special regulation of freedom of speech through the press was some special features of broadcasting, scarcity of airwaves and the push media character of broadcasting. And it seems to me that when the new landscape, media landscape, becomes much more different, then those justifications for regulation might just gradually disappear, and then it would be up to self-regulation what happens. Either it works or not, because we would not have the right to say, or states should not have the power to say, that you are not doing journalism responsibly enough, so I regulate you. I'm just making this point, and I see counter-arguments myself, but no time, so I'm just raising that. So what do you think about it? Because the last sentence, the tendency seems to me extending broadcast regulation to internet without caring too much to elaborate or spell out, at least in some bullet points, some sort of justification for doing so, when the logical way to go would be the other way, that when the media landscape becomes more and more diverse, then the constitutional justification for restricting free speech through restricting free press might just disappear. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. And the very last question here.
Hello, Catherine Fitzpatrick from New York. It seems to me that increasingly media isn't just coming from discrete media organizations, but it's more about search plus the social graph. and that most people are getting their media from social media, and then that means that the platforms are the ones that you ask for self-regulation, except there they can hide behind safe harbor and common carrier status. And really, my question then is what you do about that incredible syndication power, because even though Murdoch could buy the Wall Street Journal, that didn't help him win the elections. The people who won the elections were engineers from Facebook and Google who helped Obama's digital analytics team. That's the future.
Thank you. So, one, yes. The last one before.
I'm just wondering if we're confusing self-regulation with a discussion on ethics, standards, and values. I'm also concerned about what happens to self-regulators who live in repressive countries, and at what point that they start self-regulating free speech. So if we could have a little discussion on that.
Thank you. We'll try to, I'm not sure if we will be able to have a little discussion about that, but we'll try to answer. So we go from right to left, and you are.
Thank you. I fear that I don't know enough to respond to the question from the Finnish gentleman. I have to repeat what I said before. I think if the problem that self-regulation is trying to solve is to keep the government away rather than to do something positive, then the risk increases that it's solving the wrong problem. The co-regulation issue is one that's very close to my heart. The problem, I have unending arguments with people in the European Commission about this, because the problem, as certain policymakers see it, is that co-regulation involves a degree of responsibility. And if you can push industry into undertaking restrictions of fundamental rights of whatever kind, without actually taking part in it, without it being co-regulation, then you can do lots more than otherwise would be the case. So, for example, there's a European directive on child protection online, and it allows countries to voluntarily block content. But the European Commission has said that blocking of content is a restriction on fundamental rights. So we said, look, if it's a restriction, then it needs to be based on law. And the response was that the Charter is not, in general, binding upon private individuals or undertakings such as internet service providers. So yes, co-regulation would be good because it would bring about a degree of state responsibility. But as things stand, states have the power to push industry, and as long as it's not called co-regulation, they don't have the responsibility to go with it. So it's very hard to get governments to go in that direction. On the platforms hiding behind safe harbor and common carrier, the problem is that the opposite isn't very good either. We have a situation in Europe, for example, that Google has taken it upon itself to globally implement the US Digital Millennium Copyright Act. So if you're in Azerbaijan or in Tashkent or wherever, and somebody makes a complaint against your content in the US under US law, you'll be judged by Google under US law and de-indexed if they followed the steps in the DMCA. So you might not like them not regulating content, but regulating content under foreign laws isn't necessarily a good thing either. There are a lot of questions.
Thank you. Klaus?
I have three remarks. On the one hand, I really think that co-regulation is one thing that has to be discussed more. because I think at least companies that stick to certain ethical values do not should not have an economic disadvantage. For example, if you have a look at boulevard newspapers getting more readers because they breach ethical standards all the time. A second point on this cultural issue of media self-regulation, and that it refers a lot to countries. I think that's one thing I can really recommend you our books, and because that's really a hard topic to discuss in 2 minutes. And I don't think that we can discuss self-regulation without also touching the issue of ethical values, because self-regulation should be based on ethical codes, and those are kind of ethical values. So I think that's always, you can't discuss it without the ethical issue. That's it.
Thank you very much. Adeline?
Yeah, I just want to touch upon one point which was mentioned by a few participants about the link between the judiciary and the self-regulation, which has been actually a growing kind of problem in a way, because on one side the the recognition of the press council work by the courts of justice has been by some press council recognized as something positive, and it's even the case in Bosnia, where actually they even have tried to raise awareness about their work with the courts of justice. But then, as you mentioned, actually there is another problem right now, which is the use of press council's decision by the courts of justice, transforming some ethical standards into judicial values, which actually is not the aim, because ethical value and ethical standards should be much broader than actually the judicial, than the law. So we're actually facing a situation where we need a clarification between these two spheres that's clear, and some press council are trying to adopt some guidelines to prevent some people to go to court and to use their decision in the courts of justice, but you cannot deny anyone the right to go to court. So again, this is an issue, and I know that some press council have actually adopted some specific guidelines, just that asking someone to kind of informally say that he will not go to court. But it's also like a problem like in the Netherlands, where I think that a newspaper decided not to be part anymore of the press council, because actually one of the complainant went to court, used the decision against the newspaper, and if there wasn't been the press council decision, most probably then he wouldn't have been charged. So the same, actually, there is actually the same discussion at the moment at the European Court of Human Rights, where the court in 2007 referred to a press council decision. It was about the case in Switzerland so they are actually at the moment a lot of discussion, and there is a need to clarify those links between the two spheres, definitely.
Okay. Thank you. Liliana?
I would add just some sentences to what Adeline stressed now. The self-regulation is mediation process, and in defamation law in Bosnia and Herzegovina, by which the defamation is decriminalized in 2000, in Article 8 it is said that everyone can file complaints, file, how to say that, file of complaint to the court, but before that it is obliged to approach to media to diminish damage. And the judges have to respect that, and because of that we developed that educational program, what is embraced by judges and prosecutors about freedom of media. What is it, freedom of media? How important is to respect that, and what are the professional standards of journalism, meaning to know what is difference between the news, between investigative article, and between comment or cartoon. Because they have to know these things before file anything or sentence to media. And they are not, court is not obliged to respect decisions of the Complaints Commission, of the Press Council. But in most cases, they consult the Press Council if they have some dilemmas. Or several times during last year, some of the members of the Press Council was invited as advisor, something consultant in some cases, just to clarify, is that professional standard or not, because judge is not obliged to know professional standards of journalism. This is a good cooperation between self-regulatory body and judiciary, and that's important to develop and to have. Actually, I know that in Sweden they have something similar also. And talking about co-regulation, it is a question what was posed so many times. So many people ask why we do not have co-regulation. Every option is open, but actually talking about to do something with the web portals, with the news portals, someone had to start. The self-regulatory bodies started. What will be in the future? So because of that, we have such kind of discussion. We will find some maybe better solution. About public, what you have asked, public component, public is crucial for implementation of the self-regulation, both in print media and in online media. And we work a lot with citizens, broad citizens, and with info meetings, providing them information about complaints procedure, about their rights, their human rights on accurate and timely information, and how to recognize breach of code, because every breach of code and manipulative information is something against their human rights. And people react. We have had hundreds of complaints last year, and 70 of them concerned online media. And people react, especially when they recognize hate speech and discrimination, because it is extremely sensitive topic in our time and circumstances in our country. Maybe somewhere else will not be like that. So the public is crucial part of every self-regulatory body, and because of that, it is difficult for our colleague in certain countries. Someone asked how self-regulation is going on in certain countries with the repressions. They struggle a lot to develop freedom of media, freedom of informing and practice of the self-regulation, because it is not easy in some country to encourage people to send complaints and said this is wrong, and to put their name under that complaints. This is a problem in most of post-communist countries. We have to raise awareness of people that they have a right to fight for their human rights. One of that human rights in fight against manipulative information. We have had in 90s huge, very bad experience with manipulative information, which arose in some bloody war, actually. And we do not want to repeat that. And because of that, we have to work with people. We have to inform people that they have a right. We have to inform people about all recommendations of Council of Europe about freedom of media, freedom of investigative report, freedom of political debate and satire and everything else, but not only people, not only ordinary citizens, but professionals as judges and prosecutors and lawyers and many others, police agencies, people from police agencies, every other who have to work all together with us for developing democracy in our countries.
Thanks very much. I mean, absolutely. I mean, I agree that media literacy, media literacy courses for judges and for public officials, absolutely essential, as well as for journalists and people working in the industry. Absolutely right. A number of things I just wanted to very quickly come back to and so on. I think co-regulation is an important question, which brings in that whole debate about whether or not we have legal underpinning. This is the controversial term, which is actually sort of dividing the sort of legislators and industry in Britain at the moment. Legal underpinning of self-regulation. How does it work, and how does it work in a way which does not encourage political interference and intervention? And in Southeast Europe, we have massive problems because we have examples where actually legal underpinning does not protect editorial independence and so on. In fact, it creates major problems. So we have to be very careful. But co-regulation can work and does work in those countries where you have good internal self-regulation. I think Denmark is a good example. So the fact of the matter is these things work together. If you have awareness and understanding within the industry of the need to actually respect values and to follow codes and have good governance and good practice, you will get respect for co-regulation in the sense and protection of editorial independence. But so one has to be very, very careful about that. Nevertheless, I think that there's a couple of things that I wanted to follow up on, particularly related to new media. It is true that many press councils now are dealing with complaints on online media, but actually most of them are only dealing with complaints on online media that are attached to traditional media, that are actually already part of the self-regulating process. So there's a big question mark there, which is actually how do we extend it to the genuinely new media? That is to say, new online services which are being created and so on. Merely extending tradition from within traditional media, extending the form of self-regulation is necessary, of course, but is it enough? I mean, I think that's a major question. Therefore, that brings us on to the question of is there a responsibility? And I think the point that you make here is absolutely right. Portals and the new informational landscape brings in new players who also have responsibilities. And Google and others have been are in pitched battles at the moment with traditional media. And one of those big questions is that traditional media are saying we have had to reduce investment in journalism because our financial and economic circumstances have been changed as a result of the activities of new organizations. And so therefore, what we say to these new organizations is you have a responsibility, a social responsibility, a moral responsibility. I know that doesn't apply in the economic world, but the moral responsibility of companies like Google to pay back and to send some of the enormous profits that they're making from the use of existing traditional media back into rekindling and reinvesting in journalism is absolutely essential, which is why I welcome, for example, the decision that's been taken by Google in France to actually set up and to set aside 60 million euro, which is going to be invested in traditional online media journalism development. That seems to me a step forward. It's a step forward. It's not enough in my view, but it's a step forward in recognizing that companies that make massive profits by providing a gateway for people to have access to traditional journalism have a responsibility to make some contribution towards that journalism. This is another debate, and I think it could take another meeting because it actually raises a whole number of other questions. But for me, there's no doubt at all, as a journalist and as a representative of journalists who are suffering absolutely from the lack of investment in good quality journalism and in ethical conditions in which journalism to work, that there is a need to find the resources which will help media and journalists to actually rebuild some sort of professional credibility. And who's going to pay for it? That's the question. And I think organizations like Google do have a responsibility to recognize that they are a market model which is making money out of journalism and media products which are being organized in a different way and who somebody else is paying for. So I think this raises an enormously important question. And so therefore we are in the midst of a sort of change which I think could bring about sort of more investment in good journalism, ethical journalism. One last point I want to make is it's inevitable, and I think it's right, that there should be, where media are signing up to forms of self-regulation which are credible, and I use the word credible absolutely deliberately because I think this is the biggest question that we have to deal with. How do we make self-regulation credible? But if media organizations sign up to and align themselves to credible forms of self-regulation, there should be some carrot that is provided to them to be entering into that process. And I think that the fact that this week in the United Kingdom, a bill was introduced into the Parliament which is proposing to provide for the conditions where if media companies are subject to the possibility of exemplary damages in court on defamation or privacy issues and so on, that if they have signed up to the self-regulation process, if they can demonstrate their commitment to values and journalism and so on, they will be entitled to a reduction in, for a consideration of a reduction in the damages that they would suffer. And that will be tremendously important because it's a recognition that you need to get a balance between how the courts apply the law and the damages that they apply and the commitment of media organizations and journalism to values and so on. And so I think, therefore, this question of carrot and stick, the stick through a credible form of self-regulation, the carrot through encouraging media and journalistic groups to be part of the process and by so doing to allow themselves to plead in courts their commitment to values and to demonstrate that, and by so doing to reduce the possibility of heavy damages, I think is a really important development, because in some countries, I think the United Kingdom is one of them, the laws of defamation in particular and privacy as well are punitive and have created a situation where media and journalism suffers as a result of it.
So thank you very much. We have run out of time. Thanks to the panelists, and in particular thanks to Aidan, and thanks to you and those who have assisted. Thank you very much.